In the far hills of Tennessee Ridge, the morning mist curled over the valley like a sleeping spirit. Locals said that if you listened closely, you could hear whispers riding the fog, laughter, faint and distant, from a time long gone. The source of those whispers was known to everyone: the Hollow Ridge Schoolhouse. Built in 1862, it once held the laughter of mountain children learning their letters, their songs echoing down the slope. But now, in 1884, its windows were clouded with dust, and ivy climbed the rotting walls. No one had taught there in 10 years, not since the fire. At the general store, old-timers swore they still saw lantern light flicker inside on moonless nights. "That place remembers," they'd whisper, shaking their heads. "It remembers too much." And on a crisp October morning, a young woman named Clara Whitfield arrived, determined to bring life and learning back to the forgotten school. Clara Whitfield was 22, slight and graceful, with chestnut hair tucked under a bonnet and eyes that carried more strength than sorrow. She rode into town with one horse, one suitcase, and a letter from the Tennessee Education Board naming her as the new teacher for the Ridge. When she stopped at the mayor's porch, the townsfolk gathered around her wagon. They hadn't seen a teacher in a decade. Children peeked shyly from behind their mothers' skirts. Men removed their hats out of respect, or maybe pity. The mayor, Thomas Ewell, handed her a large brass key. "It's been locked since the fire," he said quietly. "Folks don't go up there after dark. But we reckon if anyone can tame that place, it's you, Miss Whitfield." Clara smiled. "If there are ghosts," she said gently, "perhaps they just miss being taught." The mayor chuckled uneasily. "Just remember, miss, if you hear the bell ring when you're alone, it's best to leave." But Clara didn't flinch. She tucked the key into her pocket and set off up the winding trail to Hollow Ridge, where a century's worth of silence waited for her. The key turned with a heavy click. The door groaned open, spilling a breath of stale air and the scent of old timber. Inside, the schoolhouse was frozen in time. Desks stood in uneven rows, as though children had left them mid-lesson. Dust motes drifted through shafts of sunlight, slicing across the floorboards. A faded chalkboard still bore faint scrawls: 2 plus 2 equals 4, apple, ball, cat. Clara walked slowly down the aisle, her boots creaking against the wood. On the teacher's desk lay a cracked bell, its handle green with age. She touched it gently. And in that instant, a gust of wind swept through the room, though every window was closed. Her lantern flickered. Somewhere behind her, a faint sound. The rustle of paper, the creak of a chair. She turned quickly. Nothing. Only silence and dust. But just before she left, she could have sworn she heard a child's whisper. "Miss Harper?" The next morning, Clara rang the bell at dawn. Its tone carried over the ridge, clear and sweet, the first sound of learning in a decade. 6 children came that day. Barefoot boys, shy girls in patched dresses, all clutching slate boards and nervous smiles. They sat quietly as Clara introduced herself. "Good morning," she said brightly. "My name is Miss Whitfield, and together we'll learn more than just letters and numbers. We'll learn about the world." But as she turned to write her name on the chalkboard, the chalk snapped in two with a sharp crack. The children jumped. One whispered, "It don't like new teachers." Clara forced a smile. "Then we'll teach it to behave." That evening, after the children left, Clara sat alone, grading their simple arithmetic. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees. Then she heard it, a soft giggle near the back row. She looked up sharply. The room was empty. And then, faintly, a whisper floated through the air. "You forgot to ring the bell, Miss Harper." At dawn, the sound of the bell woke her. She rushed outside. No one was there. Yet the brass bell was swinging gently, ringing by itself in the morning air. When she steadied it, she noticed an engraving she hadn't seen before. For Miss June Harper, 1874. Her stomach tightened. She had heard the townsfolk mention that name. Miss June Harper had been the teacher before the fire, young, kind, and beloved. 10 years ago, on a stormy October night, the woods caught fire from a lightning strike. The children were trapped inside the school. Miss Harper ran in to save them. No one came out. The schoolhouse survived. But she and her 6 pupils vanished. Now Clara realized. There were 6 children in her class, 6 living souls, and maybe 6 others unseen. The following afternoon, Clara tried to dismiss her fears. She stood tall before her class and continued their reading lesson. Her voice echoed softly through the still air. "The sun shines over the hill," she read aloud. And then, softly, from the back row, a faint echo repeated her words. "The sun shines over the hill." The children turned. No one was there. The whisper came again, then faded. The room grew cold. A candle sputtered out. Clara's hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. "All right," she said firmly. "Whoever you are, if you wish to learn, you're welcome." That night, after the children went home, she lit a lantern and whispered into the empty room, "If someone is here, I mean no harm." The air grew still, and a single piece of chalk rolled gently across the floor, stopping at her feet. The next day, as Clara scrubbed the old desks, she noticed a floorboard that felt loose. She pried it open, and beneath it lay a small leather-bound notebook, its cover burned and brittle. Inside were pages of children's drawings, stick figures, flowers, trees. The handwriting was clumsy, endearing, but the last page chilled her to the bone. It read, "Miss Harper says we'll stay after class tomorrow. She has a secret to tell us." Dated October 9th, 1874, the night of the fire. Clara's hand trembled as she closed the book. The date was exactly 10 years ago, to the day she arrived. Coincidence, perhaps, or something. Waiting. That evening, Clara went to visit Mrs. Edna Givens, the oldest woman in town, a frail soul with clear blue eyes and a memory sharp as a needle. When Clara asked about Miss Harper, Mrs. Givens's hands began to tremble. "She was a sweet girl, that June," she whispered. "Loved those children like her own. When the fire came, she ran into the woods to lead them out. They say the blaze circled back, trapping them near the ridge. No one found their bodies, just this one bell lying in the ash." She looked up, eyes watery. "That schoolhouse should have burned too, but it didn't. Not a single board scorched. It's as if it refused to let go." Clara felt a chill run through her veins. 6 children, 1 teacher, gone, but not at rest. That night she opened her notebook and wrote, "If they never finish their lesson, maybe I can help them finish it now." The moon hung pale above Hollow Ridge as Clara lit her lamp and opened the schoolhouse door once more. She had arranged 6 small chairs in a circle, just as in the old notebook sketches. "If you're still here," she said softly, her voice trembling, "class is in session." The wind whispered through the cracks. The lantern flickered. Then, faintly, outlines began to appear, small shapes glowing faint blue. 6 children, a boy with freckles, a girl with long braids, twins clutching hands. Their eyes were wide, sad, and hopeful all at once. Clara's heart pounded, but instead of screaming, she smiled. "All right," she said gently. "Let's begin." She opened her primer book and began reading simple words: hope, love, forgive. The ghostly children repeated them in soft echoes, their voices fragile but bright. And for the first time in 10 years, laughter, though faint, filled the Hollow Ridge schoolhouse again. Every night that followed, Clara taught 2 classes, one for the living by day, one for the lost by night. She taught the spirits their lessons with patience and warmth. They listened, eager as any child. When they solved sums, the chalk floated and wrote on its own. When she told stories, the lantern light grew golden, as though the air itself smiled. The living children thrived, too. They said the schoolhouse felt different, like it's happy now. Even the townsfolk began to notice. The air around the ridge grew warmer. The birds returned to the trees. One night, as Clara closed her book, a new figure appeared near the doorway. A woman, shimmering like starlight, holding a familiar bell. "Miss Harper," Clara breathed. The spirit teacher smiled, eyes filled with both sorrow and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. They waited for someone who still believed they could learn. And then, just before vanishing into the lamplight, she added, "But the final lesson isn't theirs, Miss Whitfield. It's yours." For several nights after her first meeting with Miss Harper, Clara wondered if it had been a dream, the kind born of exhaustion and imagination. But each evening, the same warm light filled the room, and faint laughter drifted through the rafters. On the 5th night, as the ghostly children practiced reading from the primer, the door at the back of the schoolhouse opened soundlessly. Miss Harper appeared again, pale, kind, her presence calm as moonlight. The brass bell hung from her hand, its engraved letters gleaming softly. Clara stood frozen. "You stayed for them," she whispered. Miss Harper nodded, her expression a blend of peace and regret. "I couldn't leave," she said. "Not until they learned what I couldn't teach. That love doesn't end, even in the fire." Her voice trembled. "But I failed them." "The fire took us before our final lesson." Clara stepped closer. "Then let me help you finish it." Miss Harper smiled faintly. "You would do that for us?" Clara's eyes softened. No one deserves to be forgotten, not teacher nor child. And that night, 2 teachers, one living, one long departed, prepared to hold the most important lesson Tennessee Ridge had ever seen. The next night, the classroom filled with a shimmering golden light as both teachers stood before their students. Clara noticed Miss Harper's hands trembling as she lifted the old bell. "Children," Miss Harper said softly, 10 years ago, I promised you a secret. It was this: that the greatest lesson isn't about letters or numbers. It's about forgiveness." The ghostly children stared, their forms flickering like candle flames. "I couldn't save you," Miss Harper whispered, her voice breaking. "I tried. I carried each of you through the fire until the smoke took me too. I thought I'd failed you. I thought I didn't deserve peace." Clara stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "Maybe peace isn't something we earn, Miss Harper. Maybe it's something we teach." The little girl with braids smiled faintly. "You did save us, Miss Harper. We just didn't know how to tell you." Miss Harper's tears shimmered like light. For the first time in a decade, the weight of her guilt began to lift. And Clara realized this wasn't just about helping lost spirits find rest. It was about teaching a woman's soul to forgive itself. As October 9th approached, the 10-year anniversary of the fire, Clara planned a special class. She invited both her living students and their parents to attend. "It's a lesson on kindness and remembrance," she said, "for those who came before us." The morning was crisp, the air scented with pine and smoke from distant hearths. Inside the schoolhouse, the desks were polished, the floors swept clean, and wildflowers rested in glass jars along the windowsills. At precisely noon, Clara began. She asked each child to stand and read a verse about courage, hope, and forgiveness. Their small voices rose in rhythm, innocent yet strong. Behind them, unseen, 6 faint figures stood, the spirits of Miss Harper's class. repeating the same words, their echoes blending with the living voices. Clara felt the two worlds folding together, life and afterlife, past and present, united by one shared classroom. And when the last verse ended, she reached for the brass bell. The bell had been silent for 10 years. But when Clara rang it that afternoon, its sound carried pure and strong through the hills. Each note seemed to peel away the sadness that clung to the old building. The living children smiled. They said the sound felt warm. But Clara knew what was happening. The ghostly children began to glow brighter, their faces peaceful. The little girl with braids curtsied. "Thank you, Miss Whitfield." One by one, they turned toward Miss Harper. "You can come with us now," said the freckled boy. Miss Harper's eyes shimmered with tears. "And what of Miss Whitfield?" The children smiled. "She already knows the lesson." The bell rang one final time, and with it, the 6 children and their teacher dissolved into a shower of light, drifting through the roof beams and out into the blue autumn sky. Clara stood in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. The old schoolhouse, once heavy with sorrow, now felt light, alive again. When Clara awoke the next morning, sunlight poured through her window with unusual brilliance. The air felt clean, sweet, as if the ridge itself had been washed by grace. When she reached the schoolhouse, she froze at the door. Each desk, every single one, had a fresh wildflower resting upon it, their petals still damp with dew, the same kind that had grown around the ridge where the fire had once burned. On the chalkboard, written in careful script she didn't recognize, were the words, "Thank you, Miss Whitfield. We're free." Her knees gave out. She sat at her desk and wept, not out of fear, but gratitude, because in that moment she realized she hadn't just taught reading and sums, she had taught peace and been taught it in return. That night, Clara dreamt she was back in the schoolhouse. Only this time, it was filled with sunlight, no dust, no cold air, no shadows. The desks gleamed as if newly carved. Miss Harper stood by the window, radiant and at peace. She no longer looked spectral, she looked whole. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly. "You gave them what I could not. An ending." Clara shook her head, tears shining in her eyes. "You never failed them, Miss Harper. You stayed because you loved them." Miss Harper smiled gently. "And now I can go because you stayed and loved in my place." She reached out and touched Clara's hand. It was warm. "What will happen to you?" Clara asked. Miss Harper looked toward the door where sunlight poured in. "I've got my own lesson to learn now, wherever kind souls go when they've done their part." And with that, she stepped into the light and was gone. When Clara woke, she found the brass bell resting on her nightstand, gleaming brighter than ever. Over the months that followed, Tennessee Ridge changed. The once avoided schoolhouse became a place of pride and hope. Parents said their children came home happier, more curious, as if the place itself filled them with wonder. Visitors said the building always seemed warmer than the rest of the valley. Even in winter, at dusk, townsfolk swore they sometimes heard faint music drifting through the open windows, like children singing lessons of long ago. Mayor Ewell stopped by one afternoon. "You've done something mighty strange up here, Miss Whitfield," he said with a grin. "Folks say even the land feels lighter." Clara smiled. Maybe the ridge just needed someone to listen. And from that day on, Hollow Ridge Schoolhouse became more than a classroom. It became a symbol of healing. Years passed. Clara grew older, her hair touched with silver, but her heart remained the same, steady, patient, kind. One quiet evening, as she was preparing new lessons, she noticed a carving on the teacher's desk she had never seen before. It was faint, etched deep into the wood grain. "Knowledge brings peace." Love brings freedom. Beneath it were two sets of initials, J, H, and CW. Her hand trembled as she traced the letters. Somehow, across the divide of life and death, Miss Harper had left her one last message, a bridge between their two worlds. Clara smiled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll keep teaching," she whispered, "for both of us." Decades later, when the first automobiles began to rattle through Tennessee Ridge, an elderly woman stood at the schoolhouse door one last time. Her name was still spoken with reverence, Miss Whitfield, the teacher who brought the ridge back to life. As a warm summer rain began to fall, she looked through the window and smiled. Inside, the room looked just as it had on her first day. The same desks, the same bell, the same sunlight filtering through the glass. And then she saw them, 6 small figures waving from the back of the classroom, and beside them, a young woman with a brass bell at her side. "Miss Harper." Clara raised her hand, tears blurring her vision. "Goodbye, my class," she whispered. "Class dismissed." A flash of lightning illuminated the ridge, and for a moment she thought she heard the faint ring of a bell carried through the rain. Then the vision faded, leaving only peace. When Clara Whitfield passed away in 1923, the entire town gathered at the ridge to honor her. They buried her beneath the maples behind the schoolhouse, beside a stone that read simply, "She taught even the forgotten to learn again." Generations later, children still learn inside that same building. Teachers say the room never feels cold, not even in December. Some say they've seen chalk move on its own, writing gentle words on the board. Be kind, be brave, forgive. No one fears the place anymore. In fact, it's said that Hollow Ridge Schoolhouse has the best students in all of Tennessee, seen and unseen alike. And so the legend endures, whispered across time and told around campfires. Every soul, living or lost, has something left to learn, and every teacher, living or gone, can bring light where darkness once lived. The schoolhouse still stands today, weathered but strong. And on quiet autumn mornings, if you listen closely, you might still hear it. The sound of a bell ringing gently through the hills. A lesson, never quite finished. A love, never truly gone.